Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Catherine Akins, and I'm with the Simcoe and District Chamber of Commerce as a board member and also chair of the Promotion and Events Committee. We want to welcome everyone today that took the time to join this conversation about a very important topic, and particularly during this time of the pandemic and isolation. We just know that so many people are struggling, and the Chamber feels very strongly that support and communications happen so we can learn coping strategies that will help us in our recovery. At this time, I would like to thank our event sponsor, Good Red and Closser, for their ongoing sponsorship of the Chamber of Commerce. They're longstanding members and, as I said, great supporters. And I would like to introduce Gord Malo from Good Red and Closser to say a few words and to let us know why they agreed to sponsor this event.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Just very briefly, when we were presented with the opportunity to sponsor this event, we jumped right at it. We know this topic is extremely important, and it's been a priority within our firm for many years, well before COVID. Through a health and safety committee and using external resources and expertise to really foster positive mental health. We know it's absolutely critical to do whatever we can, because without positive mental health, our well-being will never be all that it can be. In addition, all the conversations that we can have to destigmatize mental health challenges are absolutely critical. And it's important that when people are comfortable and can come forward to express those challenges, that they have the resources available to them to adequately address those challenges. So the more conversations and events that we can have like this, the better we all are for it. So we're proud to sponsor today's activities, and thank you for the Chamber for leading the charge and putting this together. I'll pass it back over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Gord. We really appreciate your sponsorship. I'd now like to introduce Jean Montgomery. We are so very fortunate to have a local expert like Jean with us today. Jean has over 20 years of experience in our community and has a sincere passion for wellness, providing a solid foundation for knowledge transfer. She offers exceptional training opportunities for workplace, community, health, and social services. She's a seasoned facilitator and has provided hundreds of hours of training to school boards, the Ontario Provincial Police, Indigenous communities, and corporations, to name a few. Jean also happens to be the past recipient of the Chamber's Outstanding Community Service Award, so we are especially pleased to have her join us today. Jean has brought a guest with her today also, and she will introduce her guest as she moves through her presentation. So on behalf of the Simcoe and District Chamber of Commerce, welcome, Jean.
Thank you so much. It is truly a pleasure to be here, and I really would like to send kudos to the Chamber of Commerce and to the sponsors here today. It's so important that we open the door for conversation about mental health and wellness. So thank you all for attending, and I hope that we can all learn together and become a community where mental health is priority and we can all experience good mental well-being. So we'd like to get started. The talk all everywhere is about the impact of COVID. And you know, managing through the challenges of COVID has certainly had a huge impact on our mental, physical health, and well-being, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And we don't really take the time to step back and assess, hey, what's really happening here and how am I coping? There's so much uncertainty. People have different responses, but you look at the little image at the bottom where it says COVID is about loss and it leads to grief, because we can all think of how much we've lost over the last year. Wow, it's just unbelievable. And it's always different for everyone. But we have to really consider the loss of our social beings, the loss of school for kids, loss of activities, loss. We could go on. And it has a huge impact on us. And we have to really step back, and we need to almost grieve those losses. We have to assess, okay, I've lost these things. We have to understand that there's something called toxic positivity. We can't just say, oh, it's going to get better, it's going to be great. We have to, be real and say it's not great, but we can't wallow in that situation. But we have to grieve those losses and see how we're going to respond and how we can move on. But the idea of having no control and the uncertainty, it has a huge impact on us. And how we respond, it's just a natural reaction to an unnatural situation. So it's not about the circumstance, but it's how we respond to the circumstance. And we all respond differently, but we want to make sure that we don't get lost in that sea of what we call languishing, that we're not really depressed, but we're not motivated, and we're just not living life to the fullest. And we need to really realize where we're at and how we can take care of ourselves and how we can cope. So we'll move on to the next slide and talk about what is mental health and well-being. Mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. And that is a huge statement to make. We need a balance of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And how many times have we really sat back and said, okay, how am I doing? How's my mental health? How's my emotional health? How's my physical health? And how's my spiritual health, which often gets neglected. So we need that balance, but we need to be intentional about assessing where we're at. So mental health, mental illness. The words are interchanged a lot, but there is a difference. We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, but mental illness is a serious disturbance in thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that's severe enough to affect day-to-day functioning. We don't always think about that, but it's the same as physical health. When it affects our functioning, we need to address it. Mental illness is treatable, just like physical illness is treatable. And, so we think, okay, what's the big deal? People can get help. But let's talk a little bit about what is mental health. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see there on the right-hand side, this would be people who do not have a diagnosed mental illness. And so they are well mentally, but are they? We can see that people with no diagnosis can enjoy great mental health in the top right quadrant. But if people with no diagnosed illness don't take care of themselves, and if they don't intentionally practice self-care, and they're under a lot of stress and don't have a great lifestyle, they can have very poor mental health. And we look over to the left side, there may be people who do have a diagnosed mental illness, maybe depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, substance abuse disorder. But even though they have a diagnosis, if they concur with their, maybe if they're on any medication or if they see a counselor and they have a good lifestyle that is intentional, they can have very good mental health. However, the same person, if they do not intentionally live with a good lifestyle and are not on a regime of medication that they need to be, or don't have supports in the community, their mental health can be very compromised. So you see, mental health is something we all have. It can be good or bad, no matter who we are. So we need to understand we do have control over our mental health, like we have control over our physical health when we take care of ourselves. So we'll move on to the next, a few more facts about mental illness. Mental illness affects 1 in 5. We hear this, sometimes we hear 1 in 3 people, and this is over a lifetime. But mental health problems can lead to mental illness. And no one is immune. It can affect anyone. Sometimes circumstances lead us to have very poor mental health that can lead to a diagnosis. But people living with a mental illness are contributing members of our community. And we have to realize that mental illness is not a personal weakness, but an illness. So why don't people get help? Well, because of stigma, what we all think and how we label people. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll think about stigma. Stigma hurts everyone. And it's the language we use. You know, we've all heard people say, oh, that person's wacko, they're mental, they're schizo. Or this is what we hear in our communities. But it causes fear, and we fear what we don't understand, and it prohibits recovery. So people have a distorted understanding of mental illness, because for some it could be scary, just like a physical illness could be scary, but it's the perception. And some people have that self-distorted view and perception, and that prohibits them from reaching out for recovery and for resources. But because of this perception and the stigma, the stats say that almost half of the people that are struggling with a depression will not reach out to get any help. That's a lot of people that are struggling. And even the words we use, you know, sometimes people do struggle with a mental illness, but we like to say that people live with the mental illness, because when it's managed and controlled, we live with it just like we would live with diabetes. So the stigma really is the huge barrier that stands between people getting help and living a full and vibrant life. People struggle through depression, and depression can certainly lead to a substance use disorder, addiction, because you know what? Drugs and alcohol are a quick and easy way to have that depression subside for just a little while. And we can see in our community and in so many communities why addiction is on the rise. The stats have just come out more today, how many more people have been seeking help for addiction. And, you know, when people are in that constant cycle, they have no hope that things will get better. And with COVID happening now, we don't know. And when people have no hope that things will be different tomorrow and no support, it can truly lead to thoughts of suicide. So we really have to be aware, and again, to assess of our own mental health, where we're at, and our friends and family, and be really intentional about seeing where they're at, and not just asking, how are you doing? They say, fine. We say fine means, you know, feelings inside not expressed. And how can we ask some different questions to really find out how people are doing, and just really break that stigma and lose the label. So we can see how some of the people in our community have done that. If we move to the next slide, called The Faces of Mental Illness. So here we see Jim Carrey, Clara Hughes, the Olympian, and Romeo Dillard. And we see Charles Schultz, Margaret Trudeau, Ted Turner, Sheryl Crow, Winston Churchill, and Lady Di, all had a diagnosed mental illness. And at times in their life, they did struggle, but they reached out and got that help they needed. And wow, are these ever successful people? So, you know, we need to lose the label, because judging a person doesn't define who they are, it defines who we are. So we can't say that having a diagnosis of a mental illness is doom and gloom. It's just like a physical illness. Let's step out, take control, and see what the future holds for all of us, whether it's us or our family or friends. We need to be intentional. So we think about, on the next slide, we talk about recovery. So this is very important that we really learn that it's okay to not be okay. And this is what happens so often, is that we want to think that we can do it ourselves. I feel depressed, I'm anxious, but I should be able to do this. I should be able to be strong. It's okay to say, I can't do this anymore. I need help. And once we lose that label, and once we take that mask off, and literally we're always wearing a mask these days, but you know, so often people who are struggling with depression, they put that mask on that they're trying to say, I'm okay, I'm okay. And they're trying to fool everyone, and maybe even themselves, to believe that they are okay. But we need to be real. We need to let people around us be real and say, I'm not doing well. And it's okay to not be okay. So what do we do next? Once someone does, we realize someone may need some help, or we may need help ourselves. We need to admit it, name it to change it for ourselves and our others. We need to take control. And hope has to be the front and center of our recovery, or anyone's recovery. It can just be a little piece of hope, but it needs to be there. We need to work together as a community to lose that stigma, to lose the label. We need to control the language that we use. We need to take control and realize that things can be very different. We need to know what the resources are in our community. And if we don't know, reach out and find out. If we're struggling ourselves, we need to rely on other people to help us. If we're one of the people helping someone else, we need to be an advocate, and we need to keep going until someone gets the help that they need, the appropriate help. It's difficult maneuvering through the system. We know that, but we need to be patient, and we need to be persistent so that we can take control and, again, embrace that hope and recovery, and know that we can have good mental health no matter if we have a diagnosed mental illness or not. And, you know, we really need to open the door for conversation when we talk with someone. And, you know, untreated mental illness can lead to very devastating outcomes. We think of people with depression or anxiety. They just think, I can't do this anymore. And we realize that, you know, I do a lot of suicide prevention training. And I always like to say, suicide is not about wanting to die, but it's about not wanting to live. Can't keep living like this. So how can we help people to see a little bit of hope and recovery that is possible? So we need to have a positive attitude. We need to be real and open the door for conversation about mental health. It's okay to not be okay. And where do we go from here? Let's take the steps for hope and recovery. So I'd like to introduce our guest, Jacob, and he has a wonderful story of recovery. And he will tell you that, you know, he struggled for a long time, and he didn't really intentionally realize what he needed to do, but it was a friend of his that helped him see that he needed to reach out for some resources and support. So that could be our mission too, that we can help someone along the way. So Jake has a wonderful story of recovery, and we always have to keep that front and center. And one quote that I listened to, it was said, one day you will tell your story and it will become part of someone else's survival guide. So I'd really like to thank Jacob for having the courage to come and speak and tell his wonderful story. Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jean. I appreciate it. I just want to say thank you to you and Linda and to everybody that for allowing me to speak. And thank you to our friends at GRK. I know a few of them, the fellows over there. So just wanted to say thanks for giving me this opportunity, giving us this opportunity to come together. I'm a little bit sad that I didn't get a flute introduction. So if anybody could fire that up, maybe we could do that. So I guess, Jean, I can just give you maybe 5 minutes on myself and we'll go from there.
5 or 10, sure.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. As many of you know, I see like Mandy and Cody and Catherine. You probably all know that I talk a lot. So, but I'll try and keep it brief. So for myself, I grew up in a small town similar to where I live now in Delhi. And I was always a fairly anxious child, but never really spoke to anybody about that. My parents got divorced when I was in grade 6, and they tried to sort of keep it amicable for the first few years while I was young, but that sort of deteriorated after a while. But even prior to that, I kind of lived in an environment where my parents did everything they could and they were good parents, but I probably saw and experienced some things that I shouldn't have and that no child should. And so into my high school days, I started experiencing kind of a lot of different anxiety, just even small things like getting on the bus with kids that I didn't know and feel like everybody was kind of staring at me. And then into my 20s, when I went away to school and learned to live on my own, when I got to Simcoe, things weren't too bad, but there were some periods over that time that I would have bouts with anxiety. But, you know, growing up in a small town, as Jean sort of mentioned, and being a young man, I was never encouraged, of course, to go and seek help. I never even thought about it. It was one of those things where the stigma was there around going to see a therapist, that was for crazy people. That was for people that were, you know, way far out, not somebody like myself. And so once I got into my 30s, I think a lot of the pressure that I had been putting on myself through my job and having a new family and a lot of different things in my life sort of bubbled up to the surface. And especially being a new dad, that was tough. And I'm not sure if there was sort of an underlying theme of, you know, my parents, you know, marriage not making it, unfortunately. They're both with people they enjoy now, so that's good. But I don't know if that theme sort of took hold with me, even though I had never really addressed any of the things that I had seen and experienced while I was young. And one of the things that sort of really didn't help me a lot was a friend of mine who now he and his wife are in great shape, but they were having some marital issues. And even though my marriage was fine and we had a young girl, now we have a little guy as well. I think he was my best buddy growing up. He was one of these guys that was straight A student, great athlete. All the teachers loved him. Everybody knew him. He was Mr. Popular, you know, Mr. All-American, I guess you could say. And for his marriage to start faltering, that sort of sent me into a thought process of, well, if Mr. Perfect can have his marriage falter, what about mine? And that sort of sent me into a bit of a spiral where I started sort of examining all the things that could go wrong in my life, whether it was my job or my marriage or being a father. And I've spoken with Jean about this a few times, where I eventually got to the point where early in my 30s, I started experiencing anxiety on a daily basis. Just getting up in the morning was extremely difficult. And, you know, I worked at a job at the Reformer. I saw Sue on there that I enjoyed very much, but at the same time, you were expected to produce. And I put more pressure on myself than anybody. And if there was mistakes made, I would take those to heart far more than I probably should have. Not just learning from them and moving on. And so there was a point where, you know, I had been 3 or 4 months where every single day was a struggle. And I had spoken to one of my friends, and he had mentioned to me that his wife, when they were in university, had went and spoken to someone and saw her doctor about some medication and encouraged me to do the same. And so that was kind of my first step. I went and saw my doctor, and he prescribed some medication, and I took it for about a month. I felt fine. Everything was going okay. So I stopped taking it, which that was on me. I should have known. I should have researched a little bit more. And I ended up having another panic attack not long afterwards. And that was where I said, you know what, I really need to sort of take ownership of this. And so I went back to the doctor and we tried a couple of different medications, and I ended up going to see a psychiatrist, and she diagnosed me with anxiety, which wasn't obviously a surprise, but it allowed me to then, for her to suggest some methods to try and help out. And so I ended up going to see a local therapist with a program called cognitive behavioral therapy. And I went once a week for about 3 months, mostly throughout the summer. And she sort of helped me break down really what I was feeling, why I was feeling it, and even better, like Jean said, how to react to a lot of things. And one of the exercises that we did was just talk about, if something were to go wrong that you're fearing, what would we do then? And so that sort of took a lot of the fear away for me in terms of, what if, it'd be unfortunate, but what if I didn't have a job as of tomorrow? What would I do then? Well, probably I could likely try and find something else. It might not be, a permanent thing, but I could try and find it. And just sort of breaking down the what ifs sort of made me realize that that monster in the corner that you don't want to talk about is probably not as bad as you think it is. And in that time, I ended up finding a medicine that worked for me. And that's another thing I know Gina talked about, the stigma around you don't want to be on medication. Well, to me, I take 2 pills before I go to sleep at night. That's really all it is. And it helps me to feel better about myself and my life. And so I guess I would say I'm considered probably one of the lucky ones in that I have to talk about things. I can't push things down like I know a lot of people my age and a lot of men specifically like to sort of push things down where they eventually come out. And for me, I have to talk about things and try and get them out. But I know that there are a lot of men out there that don't do those things for whatever reason. And I know, and I've seen it, a lot of friends of mine or people that I know of, they'll turn to alcohol, turn to drugs, turn to other things to try and sort of fill that void. And I think a lot of it is just trying to have that courage to speak out and take things head on. And that's really sort of helped me to kind of become a better person, I guess. And you know what, I went a year where things were really difficult. And like Jean said, there wasn't a lot of hope there. For whatever reason, I just didn't feel like the next day was going to be better than the one before and then the one before that. But there eventually was hope. But like Jean said, there was a lot of people around me that would say, oh, you'll get better, just focus on the good things. Well, that wasn't working, because I can tell you that I tried just about everything that I could. I started running. I tried acupuncture. I tried massage therapy. I tried eating better. And a lot of those things helped, but didn't really push me over the top. It was the therapy and the medicine and getting a chance to see my doctor and get diagnosed that really helped. A lot of those things now will very much help me, whether it's doing a spin class or going for a run or something that I enjoy like golf. That sort of stuff helps now if I'm a little bit anxious. But there was kind of for about a year, there was an overwhelming sense of dread. It was like this, I said to Jean once, there was this black cloud kind of following me around. And it was nothing to do with anything going on at home. I have a wonderful house and a great wife, and at the time, a beautiful daughter. And I had a good job and people that I liked and lots of friends. And there was nothing that was going to get me over it unless I was able to talk to somebody professionally about it. And so that's what I did. But I think the key here is, for me, everybody I talked to, it didn't matter who they were, or where they were from, or how much money they made. Everybody, if they hadn't experienced some sort of mental illness, then someone they know had, whether that was a husband, a brother, a wife, cousin, whoever it was. And once I started talking about it more, people would say, yeah, you know what, like I really feel this way when this happens. Or, I have a friend that's in really bad shape, or, this happened to me when I was 20 and I still haven't dealt with it. So I think it's something really that we all go through in one form or another, whether that's ourselves or whether that's a loved one or a family member, friend. And I think it's just important to talk about. And I will say, you know, having worked at the Reformer, and you interview and see a lot of the kids out there in high school and university, I think they are talking a lot because they go to school and they're under a lot of pressure to perform and to get good marks and to try and pay for everything and get a good job in the real world. And I think kids now are a lot more aware of these things going on, because when I was in school, not all that long ago, it just wasn't something that was talked about. And so I think the more you sort of shine a light on that darkness, it, like I say, makes it not as scary, but it's definitely something that still we have a long way to go in getting people to talk and getting people to offer their stories and not suffer in silence, because we've seen what happens when people suffer in silence. One day they're here and the next day they're gone. And you can look at it and say, a lot of people say, I had no idea what was going on. And it's not anybody's fault. But you just hope that people will kind of reach out, whether it's to a friend, a family member, or a doctor, and just say, listen, like I need help here because things aren't going well. And for me, I haven't lost any friends over it, or, you know, any family members. If anything, they've been more supportive. And I think that's the main thing that we need to get out of this, is especially for guys and women as well. But for people that don't want to talk about it, just come out and talk to somebody that you feel comfortable with. Because for me, that first step is the biggest. And once you can get on the road to getting help, then only good things can come from there. Did I keep it under time? I don't know. I wasn't.
You're good, Jacob.
Okay, beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jake. I mean, you've summed it all up wonderfully. And thank you for the courage that you have to talk about it. And you know, sometimes when we tell our story, it helps other people tell their story. And you know yourself that people put on that mask that everything's okay and I can manage. And
I did for a long time, and especially that year. Like there would be a lot of people that probably would have seen me that thought everything was just fine, because I was generally trying to be myself, and in a public situation, just kind of make people laugh and put a smile on your face and keep going. Whereas inside I was a wreck. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It wasn't anything that I did. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. It was just something that happened. And so the big thing was just trying to get out of that feeling, that sinking feeling that things aren't going to get better.
That's right. And as you said, you know, you try everything that you think might work, but it's the physical part that needs to be addressed, and through medication. And sometimes people are on medication for a brief period. Sometimes people are on for their life. And
like if you break your leg, you go to the doctor. So if there's something not wrong in your brain, why not do the same thing?
Exactly.
And you know, one of the things that I started to, I don't know if I would call it a spiritual thing, but Jean, you talked about it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I started to pay attention a little bit more to my body, because there would be 2 or 3 days usually a year where I would feel sick, and not, you know, throwing up or the flu or anything like that, but I would just feel very run down. And now I have to sort of say to myself, listen, is it the right idea to push yourself to do this, or to really, you know, be thinking about this late at night or whatever it is? I have to sort of take stock of myself and say, listen, you know what, maybe I need a break, a mental and physical break from this or that or whatever it is, and not being afraid to say no. There's a lot of times I didn't want to disappoint anybody. And so that meant saying yes to everybody. Now I can politely say, you know what, it's just not, you know, maybe going out, you know, obviously we can't go out. I would love to right now, but maybe not going to this thing where I'm going to be out super late and then have to be up tomorrow morning. Maybe that's not the best for me. Maybe in my 20s, it would have been a different story. But now that I'm 35, venturing into the 40 territory here, it's maybe not the best course of action. So, but for me, a lot of it was just finding out what works for me and what doesn't as well.
And that's so true, Jake, that, you know, whatever situation we're in, we really have to make time for self-care, and we don't. Sometimes maybe things are different through the past year, but, you know, we busy ourselves with things. But do we busy ourselves and schedule self-care, and that's different for every person. And we could have a whole session on stress management and how we can cope, but what works for one person doesn't work for another. But we have to find out what that is and really make a conscious effort to engage in it every single day. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know for myself, even at work and when I was at the Reformer, you try and do everything for everybody all at once. And I'm sure, you know, a lot of people are similar. And I've started to realize, you know what, if I can more better use my time in terms of, okay, this isn't super priority right now. Maybe I can do that tomorrow afternoon. And then there's something else that maybe I can do that on Friday morning. And so instead of having 5 things where you're trying to run and do them all, let's focus on one thing here, and then we'll get to the next, and then we'll get to the next, which I'm sure we've all had to do. Like yesterday, I had a meeting at 9 a.m. and then our council meeting was at 10:30. So you just run from one to the other. And I think it's okay to tell people between that time, listen, I'm going to have to get back to you. I can do it at this time, or I'll be working on it at this time, and not try and put all that pressure on myself just to make everybody happy. I think you got to let people know that there is a sort of a boundary, and I can't approach that limit because now I know what the limit is. And if I go past the limit, then it's no good for anybody. It's not good for them, and it's not good for me.
Well said. So true. We need to take that advice for sure. Chunk it down, do what we can do for sure.
Exactly.
Well, Jacob, there's a couple more slides, and then we're both going to be open for some Q&A if that works.
Okay.
All right. So can we go on to the next slide? All right, that's my thank you. But anyways, that's my email address there if anyone wants to. And this is online training that's available. But resources, where do we go if we are struggling? You know what, lots of us will go through periods of depression. It won't be a clinical depression, but we need to seek out help. And the best place to go first is the doctor. And then we have resources in our community addiction mental health services, Canadian Mental Health, REACH for younger people, and CAS, which is a crisis assessment and support team. If someone finds themselves in a crisis situation or really doesn't know what to do, but any of these organizations, give them a call, say, where should I go? What can I do? And, you know, there's lots of resources online, Center for Addiction and Mental Health, Center for, in Toronto, we've got so many acronyms, Center for Excellence for Child and Youth, Living Works is for suicide intervention, 211, yes, there's lots of resources. The only thing I would say is make sure it's a credible organization, because a lot of people are kind of almost cashing in now on online with resources. So talk to somebody, see what is available. And of course, you know, to make ourselves more aware and educated, there are different courses, mental health first aid, a 2-day course, which goes in depth, more in depth than we have here in an hour, and assist, which is a suicide intervention. We need to open the door for conversation. We have to lose the label, take off the mask. We have to listen to other people. Maybe we aren't struggling, but maybe people around us are. We need to open the door for conversation. So, talk about conversation. I think we're ready for Q&A.
Yes, so I'm going into the chat, and first of all, I want to apologize. I actually think our call was hacked today. I don't know how that came about. It's my first experience with a Zoom call being broken into like that, so I do apologize. So the first question is, does 211 work here in Norfolk?
Yes, it does. And again, sometimes it's difficult to maneuver through or really get the answer, but it is a good resource, and connects Ontario. But I say just reach out, call one of the mental health agencies or the doctor. There's lots of resources online, but there's lots here in our community too.
Okay, and just a reminder, you can just ask your question in the chat room, but we have one previously sent about teenage anxiety. and teenagers are all home now and being homeschooled. And is there any strategies that parents can utilize or share with their kids on how to deal with anxiety and stress for teenagers?
I'll pipe in here, and then maybe Jake, you can add something. But I just a little while ago did a webinar for Reach, and it was called "When Kids Lose Hope," because we don't realize sometimes as parents or grandparents or caregivers that our kids are struggling, and sometimes that is what we are portraying to them, because we are not I don't want to say being a good example, but we kind of relay that we have lost hope, that we don't know what to do. And we can't be positive all the time, but we need to sit down and talk about it. So we need to address the issue with our youth, really key into how they're doing. And this is, listening skills are really honed over a long period of time and can always be better. Because if you ask someone how they're doing, what are they going to say? Fine. Feelings inside not expressed. That's what fine is. So how can we ask some different questions to find out how somebody is really feeling or what they think about, not just about the pandemic, but how has it affected you? How do you feel when you can't socialize with your friends? How you can't go to school? There's no sports. Kids have lost a lot and they don't know how to deal with it, and we need to give them the tools. They're anxious, and again, open that door for conversation, and then again, be real. Tell them, yeah, this, we need to validate where someone is at, not try to tell them it's going to get better. We want to weave that in, but we need to validate. Yeah, it must be really hard for you. Tell me about it. And really seek out some help. For Reach has a virtual walk-in clinics and for youth and families. So there's lots available for them. It's kind of hard, but we need to name it to change it. We really do. Jake, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, just that I know that in speaking with Lisa, the woman that was my therapist, she had said that you wouldn't believe the amount of folks that are younger that are coming in that are in their 20s or in their teens. And so, yeah, definitely don't think that this is something that just impacts, adults. And my big thing, I guess, would be, and I'm terrified of this, being a parent of a teenager. It's going to be a few years yet, but I think one of the big things is just take stock of what's going on with your children too. Like, are they, if they're usually bubbly and talkative, have they sort of shut down? Have they, are they sleeping a lot more than they used to? Is there some telltale signs that, they might be experiencing something? Because yeah, I can only imagine, if you were, enjoyed going to school and seeing your friends and, playing sports or being in the band or whatever it is, and all of a sudden that's taken away from you. I can only imagine what that would do. So I think it's just making sure that you're not only, like Jean said, are you checking in, but just keep a close eye and make sure that, if there are some telltale signs that, that you really want to make sure that you bring that up.
Yeah, I really think we need to address the issue. And as parents, it's really, really, really hard and difficult to sit down and have these conversations with our kids. But McMaster had just put out a report that over the past year, numbers of attempted suicide in youth has really skyrocketed. So you know what? We need to have that conversation with our kids. It's the hardest question you'll ever ask them. Have you ever thought of suicide? But, we need to broach the subject that people are struggling. And sometimes when people lose hope, they think things will never change. They have to end their pain. Do you know anyone who's ever thought about suicide, or have you ever thought about suicide? We need to be real and use the word, because it's happening. So, we don't want to be all dark and doom, but we want recovery. We want somebody to be able to say, yeah, I have been thinking about suicide. In our Safe Talk training, it states that 1 in 20 people in Canada will have thoughts of suicide in a 2-week period. That's a lot of people who are struggling. It doesn't mean that they're all going to act on it, because they won't, but people are struggling and they need us to help ask the question and reach out to them. Make it okay. Lose that stigma and be a support, or ourselves, we need to reach out if we need it. Yeah.
Thanks, Jean and Jacob. Still not seeing anybody put anything in the chat. So we do have, oh, hang on, just going to go there first. Jacob, if you don't mind someone asking, what was the first step you took to figure out who you needed to reach out, and what were the indicators?
Sure. Thanks, Code. I appreciate the, I know Cody well, so I appreciate the question. Yeah. So I just wonder, can he put out, like, is he asking like what, I just want to make sure that I've got this right.
I'm just asking, like, what first steps you took. Like, what were the indicators that you figured out yourself that you needed to reach out to your doctor or whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So I think for me, it was sort of a gradual process, but I think just for me, it was almost like a slap in the face, because I had a lot of, bad, I wouldn't say bad, but I had a lot of anxiety. I was having trouble sleeping. I got to the point where I was having trouble eating. I was having trouble keeping food down. And so when my friend suggested going to see the doctor, that was kind of the first thing that I did. But yeah, it was a little bit of time to sort of look at it and say, you know what, I can't power through this anymore. I got to a point where there was something else that needed to be done. So then I started talking to a few friends. And then, like I say, the one suggested that I go to my doctor. And so once I went to the doctor, he tried me on one set of medication. And once we tried a different one, he said, you know what, I'm going to go and have you get diagnosed. And because the diagnosis then will give us a better idea of what we're dealing with. Because as smart as doctors are, physicians, they're not experts in mental health field. And so it was really when, and it was a long time. I ended up going to the Reach building in Townsend. And then I had about a 45-minute to an hour chat over Zoom at the time. This is a few years ago, but with a psychiatrist that could assess me and give me sort of exactly what I was dealing with. From that point on, then it was, okay, this is what we're going to try. And this is generally the accepted type of therapy that is best for you. It doesn't work on everybody, but this is sort of what I was told was the gold standard of therapy. And so the nurse there that had helped with the onboarding process said, oh, I know a couple ladies in Simcoe that help out. So maybe try and reach out to them and see if they're taking anybody on. So it was a lot through my doctor, and there was a lot of waiting involved. And that's one of the things that, we need, I think in Canada, we need more resources, especially for small towns, to get people the help that they need. But that was sort of the process. Code, I hope that answers your question.
And did you have, the biggest thing, I guess, is, did you have that anxiety of calling to your doctor first? You know what I mean? Like, how did you get over that?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that was more anytime that I was experiencing anxiety for maybe short periods. When I was like kind of in my 20s, especially, I would sort of just try and power through it. And usually after a couple of weeks, sort of get over it. And so I think this time, when it was an ongoing, once it started to be a month, and then 6 weeks, and then a couple of months where every day was starting to be the same. And it didn't seem to matter what I did in terms of, like, going for a run, playing baseball, golf, whatever it was. I think after a while, when it was like all day, all the time, I said, you know what, this is, and that's when I started talking to my friend about it. And he sort of suggested, you know what, to go ahead and talk to your doctor. And so that sort of started off the process. But it was, for me anyway, and like I say, this might be different for everybody, but for me, unless I was like completely consumed by something I was doing at work, even athletically, like even when I was playing hockey or golf or whatever it was, I would still be sort of consumed by it. And so that was when I sort of looked at it and said, like, this is more than just like a temporary issue. This is something that I need to like look at for my long-term well-being. thankfully, like suicide or anything never like came up. But Jean, like you talked about it a bit, like I can understand, I can definitely sympathize more now with people that have either been in that situation or, you know, had their lives end by suicide. I can understand how they get to that point, because for me, like I say, thankfully I didn't come to that point, but I can understand, especially if you're out there and asking for help and for whatever reason can't get it, or are not able to connect with a therapist or get the medication that you need and get that help that you need. I can understand how you could go down that road.
That's great, Jacob. And you know what we say, sometimes as a caregiver, maybe we're not struggling ourselves. We need to help somebody to get that help they need. Let's make the phone call together, because people are very hesitant. And as caregivers, we need to reach out for sure. That was a great question. Thank you. So I guess we are just about at our time, but I would just like to end up with something that really hit home is the serenity prayer. You know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I am a person of faith, and this is very meaningful for me, that where can we find those inner resources? And for many people, faith is something that is very important to them. So we have to be able to understand, we need to accept, and we need to have the wisdom to know what we can change and accept the help that's out there. And Jacob, your story is amazing. And thank you so much for your courage, because I know you have helped many to understand that there is recovery and there is hope out there. So thank you so much, Jacob.
I could just add, if you are whoever it is you pray to, and even if you don't pray, maybe say a little, maybe just say something good for our buddy Chicken Mike Van Netten. I know he's struggling with COVID right now, as I'm sure we've all seen. So if you could maybe just say a couple prayers up for him, I'm sure the family would appreciate that.
For sure. Thanks, Jacob.